going to open it up for a time for taking questions from our audience. I want to thank everyone for your expertise and your thoughts on those questions. And we have been collecting the questions, and they have been submitted for the panelists to answer. So let's bring Kate back online, and she will read the first question. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Kate. One of the first audience questions we received was in regard to the risk assessment tools that were talked about. One audience member would like to know, is there enough information from the PSI to modify someone for cognitive behavioral therapy upon release from an institution? And another person also wants to know whether or not the risk assessment may have, what are the panelists' opinions about whether or not a risk assessment tool at pre-sentence has a disproportionate impact on race and minority ethical issues.
One of our panelists want to take that?
I can address the first one.
Great.
This is Tim. In terms of enough information from the PSI to make decisions upon release, realistically not. You need to do a reassessment, a pre-release assessment that assesses what's going on, what programming has happened while in prison, and what treatment will become available to them upon release. If you're going to do these risk assessment tools, it needs to not just stop at the PSI stage, but you need to have pre-release tools that are done at that tail end of the prison sentence, and then you need to have tools that are for your parolees once they're out, again, because it's not set in stone what they need. There's going to be a changing role in terms of the services that we can provide, and so any good evidence-based system is going to have a continuum of tools that are used. The second piece in terms of the disproportionate impact on race, ethnic minority of defendants, I haven't seen a huge amount of data yet on that question. And I'd be real honest, Ohio has done a very poor job in collecting good race data on a statewide basis. And so in terms of the data I'm familiar with in this state, I can't answer that. Obviously, our criminal justice system has a fairly disproportionate impact on race and ethnic minority defendants. So I can't imagine that it can't also continue, even with evidence-based practices, that's not going to continue to be a problem.
Right, and I think that, and this is Chris piping in, I think that this is an area with regard to that second question about disproportionate impact, where as defense counsel's thorough understanding of the limits of the tool is appropriate. I mean, my first reaction to that question was, well, the absence of risk needs assessment in my jurisdiction definitely has a disproportionate impact on racial and ethnic minorities. And so from my point of view, increasing the amount of information available to the decision maker has the potential for improvement. But I wouldn't want to be too sanguine about being able to overcome some of the serious systemic problems that we have in the criminal justice system by through any one tool.
Richard, do you have any thoughts? And if not, we'll go to the next question.
Well, I guess I'm sitting here thinking about it. I guess what I would be concerned about, I mean, there's a lot to be concerned about. Thinking about that, the disproportionate impact question, a lot would probably have to do with how the risk assessment is created and on what kind of data it's based on. If you're creating the risk assessment based on kind of historical facts and historical trends, then the historical disproportionate impact that the criminal justice system has had on race and ethnic minorities will be reflected in the instrument. So there needs to be an understanding of that prior to the creation of the instrument to ensure that you're not simply institutionalizing in another way the historical disproportionate impact and embedding it into the instrument itself. I think it's a huge risk. And it's probably another reason that the defense needs to be at the policy table to give these kinds of instruments careful scrutiny.
Kate, another question.
Thanks, Kate. We also have another audience member asking, in their experience, the primary job of a public defender is sometimes to get their client off completely. The question is, how can this work with evidence-based practice? And in fact, where can there be opportunities for evidence-based practice to become a benefit to defense clients?
Any of our panelists want to take that very important question on? Because I would agree. Good, Chris.
As the first one over the wall. Of course, as public defenders, our objective is to get our clients off completely. However, as every public defender knows, that is not always possible. And I would somewhat reframe our overall mission, which is to say that it's to minimize the harm of a criminal charge on our clients. And that means if we can get someone all the way home, if we can absolutely get our clients off completely, then we will do that. But in many, many, many instances, we find ourselves trying to do damage control and mitigating harm. And so I see the opportunities here with more information available to decision makers to minimize harm. And I can use an example, and I think this addresses the second half of the question. And I go back to pretrial, where we're sitting at a bond setting with a client who is charged with a felony, say, drug offense that is going to get them a bond, a cash bond that is far in excess of anything that they could make. And what that translates into is that they will be sitting in jail until the case concludes, one way or the other. And as all of us know, the longer you're in jail, there's a hydraulic effect towards just getting to a plea that will allow probation or some other form of limited release. And so the bond setting is incredibly important for the overall outcome of the case for the client's liberty in the long run, be it a conviction or an acquittal altogether. So instead of having the bond set just on those blunt factors that are typically taken into account, if we have a well-tuned, well-deployed assessment at the front end that then suggests our clients, that same client, could succeed in some form of release, then if they are released, the whole number of opportunities open up with regards to the length of the pretrial release period, actually getting to some defense work that, though time-consuming, actually could help win the case and so forth. I mean, I think really what this boils down to is all of, as every public defender knows, getting somebody out at the front end helps the chances in the long run. And so that is an example of where evidence-based practices can really have a practical, beneficial effect on our clients' ultimate outcomes in their cases.
Tim or Richard, would you like to add to that? That was excellent. Thank you, Chris.
Sure.
Yeah, I think Chris said it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, 90% of our clients plea. I don't think we have an unrealistic idea about, as the phrase was put, getting our clients off. With 90% plus pleading, we're looking to prevent the recidivism as much as anybody else is. Most of our clients don't want the lifestyle of going in and out of prison. As I've said to many of my repeat clients, you get pretty bad at this crime thing. And evidence-based practices let us really focus and try and achieve treatment programs and treatment modalities that address the problems that lead to this repetitive cycle that we see in our criminal justice system. And that serves the vast majority of our clients well. And so while it may seem is somewhat in opposition to using evidence-based practices, that the theory is we're supposed to get our clients off, we can very quickly, in many, many cases, understand that this is not one of those cases we're taking to trial. This is a risk minimization in terms of how much prison they are. But more importantly, how can we get them what they need so that they can make better choices and not re-enter our system and not see us over and over?
And I would just add that it's a tool that I think as we've all said, we have to be careful, but we welcome it because the more information that we gather, oftentimes the better bail argument or post-trial arguments we can make. And it's similar to our intake forms. All of us across the country have an array of forms where we interview our clients. And I've seen some forms that are just like name and, where do you live, to a very sophisticated intake form where you ask the client about their connections to the community, the church they attend, do they like art or music or dance. And the more you know about your client, of course, the better argument you can make at bail. And as Chris said, that impacts everything thereafter. It really has that hydraulic effect, including when you go through a full trial and at sentencing, that has an impact on whether you are sentenced longer. That's what the study shows. So we do like information. We just want to make sure that it's carefully taken in, people understand what they're being asked, that their answers are accurate, the comprehension is there, and that also that these are not distributed widely. That's another question that I believe as an attorney we have to think about, is where those documents are kept and how. Anything else?
Thank you, panelists. And Kate, along those same lines, our next question is about the defense creating more of a presence with local and state government. And so the question actually poses, how can defense partner with local and state government to achieve better community safety outcomes?
Maybe, Richard, I was just thinking, because you do a lot of work in the community and also in Virginia, the work that you did with community outreach. Could you start with that?
I think it's very important to be present and to take your place amongst the leaders of the local criminal justice system. Oftentimes, criminal justice stakeholders will be meeting regularly at some sort of a roundtable or some other kind of gathering, and that the public defense bar needs to have a presence there. Obviously, if there's a public defender office, then the head of that office is often the most logical person to take that seat. But if there isn't, then the local defense bar should really find a way to organize itself and provide a representative to ensure that the voice is present when these discussions are being had. I think as a policymaker, a defense attorney has a very different role than a courtroom advocate for an individual. A defense attorney at a policy table can certainly support and should support initiatives that increase public safety. But what they're bringing to the table is the perspective of our clients and how best to achieve public safety, knowing our client community in the way that we do. That is a valuable perspective, and prosecutors and sheriffs and police and the judiciary and probation ought to welcome that perspective, because ultimately that group is going to make better decisions about public safety with that perspective. So I think there might be some initial pushback or resistance to having a defense perspective at the table. Oftentimes, we're viewed with suspicion, and all we want to do is get the person off, as one of the other questions suggested. But as a policymaker, we're in a very different role, and it might take some convincing, and it might take some small conversations to build trust. but I think having the goal of having a seat at the table to be able to bring that perspective is ultimately benefits the community and benefits our clients.
And I just add, too, that there are other places around the country. Miami has an anti-violence initiative that was related to public safety, and it was a grassroots effort to work on problems within the community that the community members brought to the defenders. So that was a unique perspective, and as Richard said, once that started and they could build trust with other stakeholders, they said, we have a different perspective and we have a way to address this problem that's unique. And that really piqued the interest of policymakers and legislators, and it's a program that's ongoing, just like in the Georgia Justice Project in Atlanta, where we know it's a unique program, but they provide jobs for when people return from incarcerated situations, whether it be a local or even a federal prison. And it's a landscape business. So here's a defender office running grassroots justice, literally. It's the title. And they also just started a bakery for women who return. And so they did that because what happened was that the client said, the problem is I get out and I don't have any way to support myself. And I need some stability. I need structure. I need to get up in the morning and be somewhere and do something that's productive. And so this grassroots justice, this landscaping business, and this bakery at the Georgia Justice Project has been doing quite well for their clients. Now, that's not a statewide system, but it's one example of where the community engagement and listening to the clients can result in some really creative results.
What a wonderful discussion. Thank you for that. And finally, we want to just ask all of you panelists, what would you recommend for defense attorneys looking to learn more about evidence-based practice and learn more in terms of collaborating with their system stakeholders?
Well, certainly to start, of course, is the written materials produced by this organization, the Evidence-Based Practices and Criminal Defense reading materials, opportunities, challenges, and practical considerations. I think that's it's a great way to start achieving a better understanding of evidence-based practices and some of the issues that the defense faces. I think also defense representatives and defense public defenders and other defenders really need to start thinking of themselves as policymakers and as co-leaders of the criminal justice system. So looking for training opportunities for leadership and management, not just CLE, but leadership and management, and learning the issues that are confronting your local criminal justice system, so that when you sit at a table, you can bring that kind of perspective to conversations with policymakers, I think is really important. I think those two things, kind of start with the reading and move towards other kinds of training. It's like any other kind of new skill, new muscle that you want to grow and make stronger. There are resources out there, and I think we have to be willing to take the initiative to go and take advantage of them.
Yeah, and if I could just add, I think that's exactly right, what Richard has just said. But I also think that there's some part of the barriers to us as defense counsel working together with other stakeholders is a severe amount of systemic mistrust. At least that's what I've observed. And I would suggest to anyone thinking about trying to build better relations and communication that can sort of get towards a more systemic reform would just be to pick an issue. It's just a really small, achievable issue that you might have in common with the sheriff or the police or the prosecutors or the judiciary or pretrial services, and see if there's an area of commonality where both of the defense and the other stakeholders could benefit from change, and see if that can't be accomplished. Because I think one or two small projects like that is a good foundation for everyone at the table recognizing our common sort of goals of building a better system, but without surrendering any of our individual roles. I mean, I think we have to approach our fellow stakeholders with a level of respect for their individual roles, and we would demand the same for ours. And I think that gets easier with practice and with some small amount of experience.
And to that end, Chris, also with a smaller project, you can study the results and outcome measurements, and therefore it might show that it's cost effective and pay for itself. So studying the results and setting an evaluation tool up with around one issue, such as dealing with the mentally ill or kids with learning disabilities, then you can show that if you get early intervention, that there are cost savings and can pay for the program. Tim?
Oh, I think it was pretty well said by Richard and Chris. The one thing I would add would be actually dig down if you're interested in learning more about evidence-based practices. Once you've read the materials in your community, whatever they're using, see if you can learn how they actually administer the tool. See if you can go through the training or at least participate in part of the training. You will learn so much about why they're asking the questions they're asking, and you may have a number of suggestions for what they're not asking, or things that just simply aren't going to be understood by your client, because ultimately I think it's the defense that has the best understanding of their clients and what some of those limitations might be. But if you can actually get involved with the administering of these instruments, you're going to learn so much about how they can be used and how they shouldn't be used.